I think a key starting point, again, starting, with that conversation with the CFO and your COOs. What is relevant to them? What makes sense to them? What will tell them what they need to do in order to be better at their jobs? You want to always start with cost to the organization, and the COO is not exempt from that. They're also being held accountable for cost.
If you've ever encountered a CFO who brushes aside your HR initiatives or always asks for an ROI on minor expenses, I'm telling you, this following webinar is perfect for you. Today, we'll be covering the HR metrics CFOs actually care about and take seriously. I am joined by Linda Schiaffino from Coach Business Solutions to discuss this very popular issue in the HR space. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Absolutely. We talked a little bit about, some leading metrics, some lagging, looking at turnover, all that good stuff. It perfectly feeds us into our next section on HR metrics that leadership actually cares about. So looking at this next slide we got here, we have this great article from Forbes on top 10 essential HR metrics in 2023. Linda, my question for you is, what are the key HR metrics that organizations should actually focus on? And, taking from any of these, would you agree with Forbes's top 10 list? What do you think?
I think it's a very strong list. I think as an HR professional, if I were to look at that, I might be a little put off because it's a lot of work there.
Yes.
And what you have to understand is that, okay, what is the actual algebraic computation of cost per hire? So someone's got to tell you what that is, right? So, and it's usually, if you're looking at employee turnover, the actual numbers are the numbers of employees left and who have left, and then the average employees. So it's all a percentage of the actual numbers. You can calculate how many employees do we have, how many have left, and what's the percentage of that. Quality of hire, that's a tricky one. You'd really have to you'd try to find the numbers that would identify the details behind that. Absenteeism, key, right? What are the total days absence against the total work days? And that's, a percentage right there. Employee turnover rate, again, very strong. Salary averages, you would want to benchmark those against industry and labor standards. And diversity ratios, very easy, right? What is your census? The challenge is in the security and the confidentiality of collecting the details about that ratio.
In terms of translating, some of these metrics into terms that resonate with bigger, KPIs, business objectives, or whatever you want to call it, or even the goals of the organization, how can HR do that? How can they actually translate those metrics into things that are a little bit more digestible?
I think a key starting point, again, starting, with that conversation with the CFO and your COOs. What is relevant to them? What makes sense to them? What will tell them what they need to do in order to be better at their jobs? You want to always start with cost to the organization, and the COO is not exempt from that. They're also being held accountable for cost. You want to do some productive analyses. You want to capture all the information so that your impact is strong and is targeted. You want to use common business language. You don't want to use the acronyms that we're so fond of in the HR world. You want to do some translation. What do some of these, acronyms mean? And then when you start hearing them use them, you've really made some progress there. Some of them, your ROI, your cost per employee, your risk analysis, when you're talking about injuries and safety, those are big things. Larger organizations are OSHA compliant, so they want to know, where are you getting that information? You want to tie your metrics to KPIs, to benchmarks, and you want to do some cost benefit analysis as well. And more importantly, you want to tell the story. You want to trigger that human aspect, because that usually translates, to employee satisfaction, and that always translates to customer success and satisfaction.
I love that. I think it's so important, to even break it down in that smaller sense on not using any acronyms or crazy things that are going to just go over, not to say that your C-suite wouldn't understand it, but sometimes those things can go over people's heads, and it's really important. Again, when we're talking about translation, we could even mean the basics of just spelling it out and making sure that, hey, this is how we got to this metric. This is why we're measuring this metric, and this is how we're measuring this metric. And I think it's so important to, again, just break it down and really explain the reasoning on why we're, calculating absenteeism rate, one of the more basic ones, right? In terms of best practices for actually presenting HR data and metrics visually to make it more understandable, how would you do so if you were, HR presenting to a leadership team?
Well, I think, one skill that is important for all of us, HR, CFO, nurse, doctor, teacher, just as a human being, is to really develop our emotional intelligence, our EQ. And one important part of that, in my opinion, in my studies of EQ, is to, know your audience. Try to understand the needs of the other person, how they're going to hear you, how you want them to hear you. And you'll never go wrong if you're taking that approach. In knowing your audience, you usually, you speak their language. So back to the, the acronyms. I'm not going to throw those, ERTC, PPP, numbers around. Because maybe they've forgotten what those mean or what they really mean, and that doesn't apply to me, that type of a thing. So people start, to tune that out if you're not really speaking the language that they use. How you can pick up on that is just, listening to them. What are some of the things that they say in, company communications or, newsletters, just trying to understand how they speak, because that's about winning people over. You'll be on their side and they'll feel that from you. On the financial end, you always want to be presenting quantifiable, verifiable, and accurate data.
Yes.
If I'm a CFO and I'm working with an HR person and I have a bias towards HR people, so, they'd always be getting, the benefit of any doubt with me, but I'm always going to look at those numbers and I'm going to say, you're telling me X, but the financials show Y. And that kind of breaks that trust. So you want to the best that you can, understand some of the financials that they're looking at. In your HRIS, it has that data right there. Yeah. So it's going to give you that information, and it's going to help you at least have that raw data so that you can tweak it and make it look more available to the person you're trying to speak to.
We actually have a feature on the data analytics platform side of things where it's all graphs, it's all tables, and it pulls directly, of course, from whether you're reporting on labor expenditure, whether you're reporting on absenteeism rate, whatever it might be. It actually has these data points up front and center. So we have had stories of, specifically I'm thinking of this healthcare company where the manager, their business manager, would literally go up and present, pretty much share their screen on the workforce.com desktop. And it would just be right there, all of the data pretty much accumulated, easy for her to just be like, here are the numbers. And we know that they're accurate, for those who are in the CFO world, who are working on the finance aspect of it. We know that they're accurate because it's tied in with everything and it's already all accounted for. This is all based off clock in, clock out, whatever it might be. And I think it's so smart just to have that as almost like a pre-made slide deck, right? And I think having that visual component, having those tables, those graphs, whatever it is, and having that already made for you with an HRIS, HCM system, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. How can HR teams demonstrate the ongoing value of HR metrics, and what do those strategies, what strategies can actually be employed to adapt to changing business needs and priorities?
Well, I think, just to touch upon what you just said about that specific business manager.
Yeah.
A little bit, dipping into the ROI. If I'm the CFO and I know what our cost for that HRIS is, and I'm looking for, cost cutting, and I'm thinking, well, what does that really provide? That business manager was very savvy in pulling that up. It helped her because she really didn't have to, or he didn't have to, really do a lot of heavy lifting there, but it just proved right there on live basis. Once you run a payroll, your data is right there, that this system is presenting some relevant data, is customizable. Maybe we could add a couple of reports that make more sense to that particular company or industry, but right there, just pulling it up was kind of a genius move because he or she proved the worth of that program. And I think that is something that is a good tool for the HR professionals to use moving forward.
Absolutely.
In terms of, demonstrating the value of HR metrics and some strategies, I've said it before, I'll say it again, stay connected to that CFO, to that COO. You want to be attentive. You want to hear what they're saying. You want to hear maybe what their pain points are, what their challenges are. To the extent that you can, access to financials, if the company makes, some of them public, will help in making sure that the information you're sharing aligns with what they're seeing. And then it'll allow you to adjust the reporting so that, that's a skill that you would be able to really bring those other team members in, because we tend to work in silos in most companies. And that's where things start to break down, because we think we're, on an island of our own, and obviously we can't be.
Yeah.
And then that just really feeds into, the importance of storytelling, right? HR can be boring to people who aren't in love with HR. We know how important it is. So how do we, again, understand what's the story they want to hear? And then formulating that so that we're always engaging them and keeping them on our side of the table.
Absolutely. I love that. The aspect of storytelling is very, very important, especially when we're talking about quantitative data, data dealing with numbers, right? It's kind of hard to create a story around something like that, but it can be done. If HR can do it, I'm sure it can be done.
Exactly.